Okay, good morning. Can everyone hear me? Please type in the chat box if you can hear me so I can make sure that the audio is working correctly. Okay, great. Hi, Tammy. I guess that means that you guys can hear me. Wonderful. Okay. Hold on one second. We're going to get started in just a minute. Bear with me for a moment. Okay, and we are going to get rolling here. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is going to be a really exciting webinar because we have a couple of superstars here. We've got Gina Brown, that I think a lot of you probably are familiar with or know personally, who's an amazing advocate and speaker. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her in just a moment. We also have Olivia Ford on here. So it's going to be really exciting. We're going to go over a lot of stuff about getting media for your advocacy, why do it, what the point is, what are the best ways to do it, how can you try to make sure the coverage comes out the way that you want it to. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So let me just tell you a little bit about our presenters today before we get started. So Gina Brown, whom a lot of you know, as I said. She is the Community High Impact Prevention Program Associate at the Institute of Women and Ethnic Studies in New Orleans. She's worked in the field of HIV for 14 years, and she's been living with HIV for 22 years. Gina graduated magna cum laude from Southern University at New Orleans with a Bachelor of Social Work and a minor in History in 2011, and she received her master's degree in 2012. Gina is a member of the President's Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, PACHA. She's a public speaker and a community advocate, and she has also appeared in many magazines and publications. Most recently, she was featured in Ebony and Jet magazine. And Gina is an ambassador for the Greater Than AIDS initiative and appearing in the Women, HIV, and Intimate Partner Violence video. For those of you who participated in our National Day of Action to End Violence Against Women Living with HIV last year, a lot of the events that our members held featured the Empowered video from the Greater Than AIDS campaign, and Gina was one of the stars of that. And she's also one of the women featured in the documentary Nothing Without Us, which is going to be released soon, and they actually did a screening of that at the International AIDS Conference in South Africa last month. In my media work as a rank and file member of my teachers union when I was a teacher back in Florida. And so I kind of learned through trial and error a lot of the different things we're going to be discussing on this webinar in terms of how you can stay on message as a spokesperson and how you can make press contact effectively. A lot of this is practice, trial and error. Practice makes better, as we like to say, because nobody is perfect. But it's all stuff you can learn. So you don't need to have a communications degree to be able to do this work, which is the great part about it. So I'm hoping that some of the stuff we go over today will help you get started. Okay. So I hear that I might have cut out for a minute there. Did you guys hear the intros of Olivia and Gina? Let me know what you missed, because it seems like my audio might have cut out. Okay, so it looks like we did not hear. Okay, sorry, can everyone hear me now? I want to make sure that I'm audible before continuing. Okay, great. So sorry, it looks like we heard about Gina, but we didn't hear about Olivia and me. So Olivia, who a lot of you know very well, she's a great friend of ours. She was previously the communications director at Positive Women's Network USA, the position that I'm now holding. And she has been engaged with HIV-related media since 2007. She's previously held leadership positions with PWN-USA, like I mentioned, and at thebody.com. Which is a comprehensive web-based HIV resource where she remains a contributing editor. I'm sure most of you are familiar with thebody.com, also our great friends. Her work has appeared in Black AIDS Weekly, Positively Aware Magazine, Pause, thebody.com, among other outlets. And she currently works as a freelance editor and writer based in New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans in the house. And then there's me. My name is Jennie Smith-Camejo. I'm the current communications director with Positive Women's Network USA. And what I had said, that I guess my intro got cut out. So I actually came into communications after being a teacher, and I served. I was frequently a member spokesperson for my teachers union in Miami, Florida, where I lived back when I was teaching. And so I learned a lot of the things that we're going to be discussing on the webinar just sort of through trial and error. I did get training, but I did not go back to school for a degree in communication. So to me, the really fun part about this kind of media work is that it can totally be learned. Practice makes better. Nobody's perfect, but it's definitely something that the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And training always helps, of course, along the way. So I'm hoping that some of you can get some great tips today that will help you in your advocacy efforts. And so what's a little bit unique about the way that we're going to do it today is you're going to kind of hear about this from three different angles. So you're going to be hearing about what reporters look for and editors look for in a story, what makes a story interesting. You're going to hear about preparing to be a spokesperson and how to stay on message from Gina, who does this frequently, and also from me about sort of the back end of it from the public relations perspective, how you're going to kind of put your pitch together and your materials. So you're going to kind of get, three different angles on it, so it should be exciting. So the goals for today are going to be to learn best practices for incorporating media strategy into campaign and event planning, to learn best practices for media outreach before a campaign event, and to learn best practices for controlling the narrative and message in media coverage. Okay, and just a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at and discussing. So why seek out media coverage, sort of, before you do it? Why do it? What makes the story newsworthy? Really important when you're planning how you're actually going to get covered. Media advisories, planning ahead and writing them. Best practices for press outreach. Staying on message when you're speaking with the media, so preparing ahead of time and the day of when it's actually happening. And how to amplify media coverage after the event. And finally, setting the record straight, so what you're going to do if a story comes out and it's not the way that you envisioned it, or something's wrong, or it's using stigmatizing language. There are some different ways that you can, try to remedy that situation. And Olivia and Gina are going to kind of share some of those with us. So we will go ahead and jump right in. So I guess the first question you kind of have to ask yourselves if you are planning a campaign or some advocacy efforts, why go for media? So not all press is good press. Some people say it is. seems to be a philosophy of a certain presidential candidate at the moment, but it's actually not always good. So bad publicity can actually hurt or kill your efforts. So you really want to make sure that you know what you're going for before you start doing it. So you should have a strategy and goals for media coverage clearly defined before you begin press outreach. So don't start thinking about what your message is going to be after you're already getting in touch with reporters. So you definitely want to know that ahead of time and have consensus with whatever the group is that you're working with, whether it's a regional chapter of PWN or another organization. If you're doing this in a group, which most advocacy efforts have to be done in a group because one person can't change everything all by themselves, you definitely want to make sure everyone's on the same page. Messaging and media goals should be included in your campaign plan, and they should always be considered when you're planning an event as part of a campaign. And that's why I was encouraging the co-chairs of regional chapters and policy reps to also participate in the webinar, because campaign planning should involve everyone who is in a leadership role within your organization or your chapter. And it's sort of something everyone needs to think about is what the message is going to be and how it's going to play out in public. Okay, and so when you're determining your media goals, the way you can kind of think about it, that you've got your typical, what do you call the 5 W's and an H, your who, what, when, where, why, hows. So who is it that you want to hear about your campaign and its goals? Because sometimes it can actually be beneficial to keep things quiet if you think you're going to get a lot of opposition that you're not really prepared to face off with in public. So, who do you want to hear about the campaign? Who's going to help you get what you need? What do you want that audience to know or believe? Okay, how can you kind of shape their understanding of your issue? How can you get them to understand and believe in your goals? So this, media outreach, it's got to be about persuasion, right? Just letting people know what's going on isn't enough. You want them to be behind you and support what you're trying to achieve. And when do you want a broader public to know about or get involved with your efforts? So again, in some cases, it's beneficial to keep it kind of quiet if you think that you're going to face a lot of popular opposition. So, the timing can be really critical, and that's something you want to consider from the beginning. What are you asking the public or your audience to do? Okay, it's always really good to have an ask. So are you asking them to call their state legislator, for example, and ask that he pass this bill or oppose this bill? Are you asking people to sign a petition? Are you asking people to show up at an event? Having an ask is always a good strategy. And how will media coverage help you achieve that goal? So again, coming back to the, how, is it going to really help you? Because it can be a lot of work to get it. It can really help, and it can also hurt. So these are things that you really want to think through before you even get started. Okay. And then strategizing for media. Getting media to cover your campaign or your event is usually not just as easy as sending out a press release. If that, it can happen occasionally, but if it does, there's probably one of two things going on, and that's either that it's just an incredible story, or also possibly if you live in a really small town where there's not much going on, then it may be easy to get the local newspaper to cover you. But if you're in a city where there's a lot of things happening all the time, you're probably going to have to pitch your story in a way that's going to make the media think it's newsworthy. So when you're planning your event or your pitch for a story, you really want to consider carefully how you can make the elements of the event itself and the message you use to frame the event newsworthy. Because I definitely remember the first few times I was going for press outreach, I thought that I could, I thought, oh, this press release is great. I'm going to send it out and my phone's going to start ringing. And that is not what happened at all. So we're going to get a little bit more into that just in a moment. And so I'm going to ask Olivia, because she's an editor and a reporter, what she finds to be newsworthy when she's looking at press releases and media advisories that come in.
Thank you so much, Jennie. Can everyone hear me, first of all? Just want to make sure that I, too, can be heard by everyone. So, just drop a quick yes. Yay. Thank you so much, Tiami. Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Jennie, as well. And I just want to make a quick distinction that I'm going to keep on coming back to sort of at different points in the webinar. Jennie called me a reporter, which I am, and at the same time, I often don't identify as a kind of reporter or journalist in the most traditional sense, where I'm sort of going out and sort of and writing stories about all sorts of different topics. I primarily identify as sort of an HIV community-based writer. So, and the publications where I've worked, and most of the publications that I work with now are sort of grounded in the HIV community, and their primary focus is and sort of goal is to report on anything and everything having to do with HIV community issues, clinical issues, et cetera. I make that distinction because oftentimes you'll be pitching stories and sending stories to HIV media, and it'll be a different experience and a different kind of relationship than when you're kind of pitching to local media and possibly having to let them know why the story that you're pitching to them is important to sort of a wider community outside of the HIV community and outside of a kind of smaller niche, a smaller community. So I'll sort of keep on touching back on that difference in some of the other comments that I make in the webinar. But just in general, in terms of what makes a story newsworthy, I've sort of gathered that both from working in HIV, working in communications with PWN, and also working as an editor with other intersectional communities that intersect with HIV. But always, no matter what sort of form of media you're working in, there are a couple of sort of key guidelines to think about when you're thinking about pitching stories. You're thinking about whether or not they're newsworthy. Number one is it new? Is this a story that the publication has covered before recently, or is it something that has sort of not happened before, basically? And that can include sort of new information on an ongoing story, so it doesn't have to be completely, no one's ever talked about it before. You might have new information. You might have a new angle on a related news event, and you might even be able to sort of bring sort of an angle to kind of a larger issue that's already ongoing that connects it to the issue that you're working on. Like, for instance, say you were pitching a story on some of the, say you were a part of the kind of women-centered care study, the community-based participatory research study that a bunch of PWNers around the U.S. were part of. Say you are pitching to sort of a general publication, a story about some of the findings from that study, and they, get your media advisory, which we're going to talk about later, and first, right away, the editor at the publication says, oh, this is about treatment as prevention. We've already covered this issue. We've already sort of let our readers know that, if when people are taking HIV treatment, they're basically unable to transmit HIV. But there's a different angle that you can bring to that issue, to that story, by talking about the fact that, the piece that I want to pitch to you is more about, I recognize you've covered this, but this is more about the fact that women living with HIV there a very low percentage of them are being counseled about treatment as prevention by their doctors. So that sort of brings a new angle to a story that hopefully the publication has covered before. They may not have. Many have not, but that's just an example. If you're approaching someone that's already done a similar story, you can talk about how the story you're pitching brings a new angle to something that they've already talked about, and more nuance to something that they've already talked about. So is it new, or is it sort of new information? Is it unusual? There's a reason why every morning the lead headline in every newspaper isn't, the sun rose in the east this morning, setting in the west is expected. I mean, that's miraculous to some, but it also is not unusual. It happens every day. Just to give kind of like a very extreme example. But are you telling someone something that will inform their audience in a way that they haven't been before? Is it something that's happening that's unusual? The kind of like classic note about journalism and about news in general is that dog bites man is not news, but man bites dog is news. So it's something sort of unusual happening that people need to know about. And that's going to vary depending on location. It's going to vary depending on your audience, again, which we're going to talk about more later. Something else that varies depending on location and depending on your audience is it interesting and is it significant? What's big news, what's really significant news that you're going to see in every sort of HIV-specific publication may need to be sort of put in more context for a more general interest publication, for a publication that that perhaps publishes work around women's issues but is less likely to do work around HIV. They're going to need to sort of be educated on why this issue is interesting and significant to their audience, to the folks who are reading their publication. And it will inform how you, in working on your campaigns, choose who to pitch to. Because, you know, if it's, say, you know, again, to use a sort of very extreme example, perhaps a technical publication that sort of provides information about smartphones and tablets or something like that is not necessarily the place where you want to expend energy pitching a story about an issue, about like a local sort of policy issue around women's health or something of that nature. So really choose wisely where you're going to be able to reach the people that you want to reach with your message. And similarly, actually, I mentioned that, you know, I have worked primarily in HIV-specific media and at HIV publications like thebody.com, where we really want to inform sort of a national and even international community about issues in the HIV community. There's a sort of broader reach there. So if you have a very local, very specific event, say you're having a rally, and you want to get people to turn out to your rally, there's an angle where you can talk about that as being of national significance because it's part of sort of nationwide HIV activities. But if your goal is to turn people out to that event, to actually have them come in person to that event, then really who you want to push is less, you know, sort of more national HIV publications and more of your local papers, your local kind of newsletters and things like that. So it's important to think about what's going to be significant. It's going to be very significant in your local area that you're going to be, you know, sort of protesting on the Capitol steps or something like that. So is it about people? All of these, you know, sort of examples that we've given have to do with something that is of significance that affects the lives, the sort of individual people's lives in readers' communities. So are you when you're pitching, are you making sure that those that you're pitching to, the publication and the editor that you're pitching to, know how this event, how this issue is going to impact sort of individual people's lives? And that includes sort of the stories and the sort of experience of spokespeople connecting their story and their experience to the larger issue. And we're going to talk about spokesperson prep as well. A last kind of point is it visual? That's not necessarily a test of whether or not something is newsworthy, because there's definitely, you know, news that occurs and issues that you'll want coverage around that don't necessarily include a visual element like people holding signs on a street corner or something else that's kind of that has a visual element. But that will definitely dictate sort of how it can be presented by publications. Is there video involved? Are there images, colorful images? Are there people's kind of faces to go along with their stories? It may sort of impact interest in the story on the part of the outlets, the news outlets that you're pitching to. And it's definitely essential when you're talking about pitching to say, television. There definitely needs to be something to show. There definitely needs to be something visual. So it's not about it's not that something is not newsworthy if there's not a visual element, but it's definitely something to think about, especially in our kind of in the digital age that we live in, where reporting happens online. People are trying to grab the attention of readers and of viewers, so those visual elements can be very important, and those are the kinds of things that you can provide along with your materials, the kinds of images that are going to the kinds of images that a journalist can capture or that you can provide in advance. So I hope that answers the question. Thanks so much, Jennie. I'm going to turn it over to you now, I believe.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think it's really important to before you even sit down to write your media advisory, because when you write your media advisory, of course, this is your first pitch to the media outlets about why they should be interested in this. So you want to think about what can make this story newsworthy, and sometimes, you have to reach for it. So it requires some thought, some brainstorming, some conversations with the other people that you're working with and with allies, sort of how can we make this relevant to more people, because that's definitely going to strengthen your pitch, especially like Olivia said, if you're reaching out to local media. So a media advisory On this slide, you can see I'm going to compare a little bit the difference between media advisories and press releases. Sometimes they kind of sometimes we'll say a press release for a media advisory, but they're actually they are a little bit different. A media advisory goes out before an event, and you're inviting media to come attend the event, or they can also cover it even if they don't attend. So, there's definitely value in reaching out to media organizations or reporters who are not local, if it's something that they have covered or you think that they'll be interested in covering based on their other work. But the purpose of it is to invite media to your event. So the media advisory should give the reporter or the outlet the important information that they need to show up and cover the event. So again, the what, the who, the when, the where. Of course, if they don't know what's going on or when, they're certainly not going to show up. And also why they should cover it. So you want to make this as newsworthy as possible, as exciting as possible. They need to feel like this is really something that they're going to miss out on if they don't cover it. And then by contrast, a press release is for news or announcements that don't involve a live event, or you could send out a press release after a live event as well if you're still trying to get a little bit more coverage. But it's not an invitation for media to show up. So basically your press release, you want to write a press release as if you were writing a story about your campaign or the news you're announcing, as if you were writing that story yourself as a reporter. So basically the way that you would want it to come out in the newspapers, ideally. So it packages your story the way you would like it covered. It should read like an article. It should contain quotes that reporters can use. So that way, if they're really interested in it, hopefully they might be calling the spokespeople that you connect them with. But if not, if they want to write something quick, a lot of times you'll find you'll get a very quick write-up that just basically comes straight out of your press release and includes quotes. So that's why it's really important to give as much information in that press release and quotes they can use as possible, and you're much more likely to get a write-up out of it. And so like I just said, it should contain all the information they need to write the story. If they're having to chase down details about it, it's definitely less likely to get covered unless, it's something that's just really groundbreaking to them, but that's not going to be most situations because there is just a lot going on in our world, as I'm sure you all know. So the elements of a media advisory, it's really important to think ahead of time about who is going to be the press contact. Sometimes it might be obvious. For example, if I'm sending out a media advisory from PWN, I'm probably going to be the press contact because I am the communications person. If you are part of a regional chapter, for example, your SCAT rep should ideally be the press contact, though it might be a co-chair depending on the situation. But one person should take responsibility for being the point of contact for reporters. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the exact same person who writes the advisory, though often it is, but it doesn't have to be. But you want to make sure that their name, phone number, and email are all included. And then that person, of course, needs to really be aware of their role, and they need to be on the lookout for any phone or email communications once the advisory has been sent out. And so ideally, this will also be the same person who is calling reporters and media outlets, and that person will have all the info. They'll have contacts for whatever spokespeople there are going to be there if it's not them themselves. So they'll have all the information that media will need. So you definitely want to make sure you have that. You want a headline that's going to grab attention and sound as exciting and important as possible. And this headline is also going to be your subject line for the email that you send this out in. So the headline is definitely worth a lot of thought, a lot of playing around with, discussion with other people, test it out on a few people before you settle on your headline, because if the headline sounds really boring, they may not even bother to read the rest of it. And then you can have a subheading that will give a little bit more detail to the headline. It can add some context. It can frame the message a little bit. And we're going to look at that in just a second. And then you're going to have your first paragraph after all of that, the headline and your contact person. And so the first paragraph is also really important, because if they don't, if the first paragraph is boring, then they're going to lose interest and move on to the next one, especially when you're contacting local media or national media. One thing you have to remember is that they are receiving tons and tons of media advisories and press releases, and it's really easy for yours to get overlooked. So it's just critical that you put as much thought and energy into making it exciting and compelling as possible, because otherwise it's probably just going to get, deleted or completely overlooked. So in the first paragraph, you want to present the importance of the event or the story and start framing the message. So you want to make this sound like this is big news. It's really important. It's going to affect a lot of people, or it's going to affect a few people very dramatically. And you want to outline the problem that's driving the campaign or the event. And we'll look at an example of this in a minute. And then, having the what, the who, the when, the where, and like Olivia just mentioned, visuals if you were trying to pitch to TV, for example, or even with local newspapers, if they're going to send a photographer, sometimes they'll send a photographer and not even a reporter. So if you have some good visuals, if you think about it ahead of time, think about ways you can make your event visual, you may still get photos in the newspaper and a write-up based on the media advisory and perhaps contact with spokespeople. So if it is going to be an event and you are interested in getting TV coverage, you definitely want to think about visuals that will be interesting and compelling. So, having people marching with signs can be really good, especially if you are expecting a big turnout. Having props. I know Wahida has shared with us a story, about a demonstration that they did up in Philly, talking about the death of healthcare, and I think they had coffins. They did a die-in on the street, and so that kind of thing can be very interesting to visual media, especially TV, but even newspapers who have photographers that they could send. And then after that, which we'll see that, like I said, we'll see this in just a moment. You're going to have another, usually 2 to 4 paragraphs after that. This can vary a little bit depending on the event and how long the paragraphs are, et cetera. But you want to give background and context to the problem that you're seeking to solve. So this is where you can get a little bit more into the details. You want to give some media-ready quotes from people involved, and those quotes should really clearly frame the message. And as a communications person, a lot of times we will actually sort of write quotes for people who are going to be spokespeople, for example, or and then we'll just ask, we'll run it by them. Are you okay with this? Would you like it changed? And, give them license to edit it as they see fit. And so, some people write their own quotes and they're fantastic, but it is something that you can do for other people as long as they are in agreement with it. So obviously you don't want to attribute anything to anyone without making sure that they're okay with it. But there's not really a problem with, writing the quote that really meets the needs of your campaign and then getting, approval from the person that you're trying to attribute that quote to. For example, the head of an organization that you're working with. And then you also want to make sure that you explain what you hope to achieve through the event or the campaign. So just protesting about a problem can be interesting, but you always want to be proposing solutions. Saying there's a problem isn't really enough because, okay, we can agree there's a problem. Well, what do we do about it? Well, you want to be the one who has the solutions to that problem. So you want to make sure that that comes across in your media advisory and also in your press release if you're doing a press release. So I put up here an example of a media advisory. This was one that I did last year for our National Day of Action to End Violence Against Women Living with HIV. So it was for October 23rd of last year. We are going to have that Day of Action again this year, just FYI. Be on the lookout for more information about that coming soon. And so, you've got the contact. So I have myself up there as the contact, name, phone number, email. The headline. Okay, you got your subheading that gives you a little bit more information. And then you've got an introductory paragraph here. It's actually a couple of paragraphs. That kind of frame the situation for you a little bit, explain what the problem is. Then you've got the event details. I've got those. I always do those in bold so that they stand out. So if someone is just sort of, looking at it quickly, their eyes will kind of go to that to see what the actual event is going to be. And then you've got, here I've just got one more paragraph. I actually cut, I think, like 2 or 3 paragraphs out just to make it fit on one slide. There was more, but you'll have your context, your background, your quotes, so it can be more than one paragraph. And then finally, at the end, we usually put what we call boilerplate language, which just explains, for example, if you're working with an organization, it's going to be the information about that organization. If you are a PWN chapter, you might want to use our boilerplate language as well, just to explain to the reporter or the media outlet who you are and, why, like kind of what your credibility is in this issue. And so if you are part of a regional chapter and you are working on something like this for your campaign, please feel free to reach out to me and I can help you with boilerplate language. Okay, and I am going to, at this point I'm passing it back to Olivia to talk a little bit more about the actual press outreach angle of it, because you write the media advisory, but then you actually have to get the media outlets involved. And so she's going to tell you a little more about that.
Right, yeah, exactly. And we touched on this a little bit when I was speaking earlier, and all of these kind of points are aspects of what you'll discuss and talk about when you're building your media strategy. Part of that is, who do you want to reach with your message? Who is your audience for this particular event, for this particular issue, and where do they go to get their news? Where do sort of large percentages of folks within the audience that you want to reach, where are they going for their news? Are they primarily going to kind of a local community newsletter or radio station, kind of a website that covers regional issues? Where can you get their eyes and get their ears on the issue and the message that you want them to know more about? So it's important to think that through in advance, because that's going to dictate which reporters or which media outlets that you're going to pitch the story, to talk about the event that's coming up or to talk about the issue. It's important also to think about, and these are all things that you can start listing. You can use these over and over again. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you'll sort of be able to pick and choose as you have, the number of events and kind of issues that you want to get media coverage around kind of mount. It'll be important to keep track of all of the reporters that you've contacted and who is, more or less likely to cover an issue or who needs to know about it. So what reporters and which media outlets have previously covered stories, both on your issue but also on similar intersectional issues and topics? Like, for instance, who is, which journalists do you see sort of repeatedly covering women's health issues or issues around, just thinking about issues that intersect with HIV community issues, who's writing about policing, who's writing about even education if it's something that relates to or that where you can make the case in your pitch for the fact that this is an issue that intersects with the issue that they're working on. And of course, don't forget bloggers, community-based writers. Don't forget online news sources. This is not just all about getting, kind of local newspapers, though that's very important, and definitely not all about getting national attention necessarily. That may not be what's warranted. You may not necessarily, you likely do not need to pitch, kind of the New York Times or, kind of the Tea Party show or something of that nature for an event where it's really important to build local power, and it's important to get local people out to the event and let them know more about it. If it's a sort of a policy issue or something that impacts the local community. So it's really important to think about who those local media outlets are, who's going to be, who's influential within the community that you're working in, who is reporting news for that community, sort of both locally and also, as I said before, in terms of kind of intersectional communities, who's writing about women, who's writing about health, reproductive justice, who's writing about education, parenting, wherever you can make a connection, and whoever you might want to cultivate a relationship with, where they will start to cover. They'll start to see the intersection between the issue that you're working on and the issue that they write about, and become more interested and want to cover that issue more over time. So yeah, that's important to look into newspapers, radio stations, TV news channels, local interest blogs, of course. Those are folks that you can reach. Those are folks that are very, very committed to letting folks know what's going on in the community immediately surrounding them. And again, I always say, that behind any news outlet, from the big to the kind of more locally focused, they're all human beings. They're all charged with, telling the truth, telling it accurately and in an interesting way. And by pitching stories to them, you're helping them to do that job. And it's also important to think about, sort of letting them know why it's going to be important to them if it's not readily apparent. And just another point that I wanted to kind of make on that is, that, hold on, I lost the train of thought. Once you've sent your media advisory, you don't just send it and forget it. You want to make sure that you follow up. You send your media advisory. That's kind of the invitation to media, the day before and also the first thing in the morning, the day of the event. And then you want to follow up by calling them, pitch fast and strong, I like that language, and, you want to practice your pitch as well, as Jennie mentioned earlier. Really think about what you want to say once you get them on the phone, to see if they're going to be able to come out to this event. Sort of broadcast news, that's TV and radio. They need, they're reporting on breaking news, so they're making those decisions, in kind of the hours before the airtime of that story. And with print news, there's often the need for more lead time than with TV and radio. And I wanted to just you started to touch on some of these issues and some of your kind of lessons learned, Jennie, in your experience. But I'm wondering if you sort of have any tips on pitching, or any of the other kind of aspects of press outreach that have come up in this part of the discussion.
Sure.
Is there anything else that you want to hear on that?
Sure. Thank you. So to me, pitching to media is really the hardest part of my job. It's much, much easier to me to write a media advisory than to call media outlets on the phone and try to hold their attention long enough to get them interested in the story. So I just want to put that out there, that it's not easy and it definitely takes time. And sometimes your story is better than other times. Sometimes, one other thing that you have to consider is that you're also competing with whatever else is going on that day. So, you might get lucky and it's a slow news day, or you might be competing with some huge major event. Maybe the president is in town. Maybe there's, God forbid, some horrible, quadruple murder or something. So you never kind of know what you're up against necessarily. So you kind of have to keep that in mind, that, other things might take precedence over your story, and it may not be because you are not doing a good job. But it is really challenging. I find especially pitching to broadcast media can be challenging, because the way that it basically works, so, as Olivia said, they start deciding what they're going to cover just, usually within a couple of hours before they're going to cover it. So you want to make sure that you get a hold of them during that crucial time when they're deciding what to cover, because if it's too late, then even if they were interested in your story, they're not going to have time to get their reporters out there or to get their camera people out there. And what TV tends to do, at least in my experience, a lot of times they will just send a cameraman or a camera person, rather, to cover the event. They won't necessarily send an actual reporter. So they'll send cameras. The cameras will get some B-roll, so just some shots of whatever's happening at the event. A lot of times they might interview a couple of people on camera, which, again, is why it's really important to have spokespeople identified ahead of time, because you don't want them to just pull some random person out of the crowd and start asking them, because you have no idea what might come out of that person's mouth. And trust me on that, it's happened at events that I've been working at. So, you have to think that there are different scenarios of coverage, so it's really important to have all the necessary information in your media advisory and to have good spokespeople lined up and prepared and ready to talk if the media does show up. So, in my experience, if you're having an event during the day, it's usually best to send your media advisory to broadcast news pretty early, right around, 7 a.m., right before then, and then follow it up with a phone call. I like to try to make it my rule to call within about 10 minutes of sending. And the reason for that is they are getting so many different advisories that if you, wait 20, 30 minutes to call, they're probably not even going to be able to find yours anymore. So if you can call very quickly after sending it, when it's still, not too far back in their inbox, you have a better chance of keeping them on the phone. And I can't tell you how many times I've called, even within, 5 or 10 minutes, and say, I sent you this advisory, I want to make sure that you got it, and they can't even find it. And so I have to send it again and then call back and try to pitch again. So, time is of the essence when you're doing this, which makes it just that much more nerve-wracking, but, it's just the way that it works. And so they are doing this really quickly. The phones are ringing off the hook, so you really have like 5 or 10 seconds to make your pitch, and that is really challenging. And so what I have learned over time is that, at least for me, I definitely pitch best when I have my pitch written out in front of me. And then once I've done it a couple of times, then it starts coming pretty naturally, and I may not need to read it anymore, but you want to make it sound as big and exciting as possible, and you need to get that expressed immediately. And so not only is what you say important, but how you say it. Because if you call and you're really quiet like this, and you're like, we're having, we're going to have a rally today. It's going to be a lot of fun. They're going to say, okay, bye. Literally, they might just hang up on you. You have to sound enthusiastic. You have to sound like, oh, my God, this is breaking news. You're not going to want to miss this. And then you need to make your pitch as fast and compelling as possible. And just as an FYI, they may not confirm over the phone whether or not they're actually going to cover it. In my experience, they usually don't tell me for sure. Sometimes they might say, okay, we'll probably send someone. Sometimes they say maybe. A lot of times they say, our editor is going to be looking at this in a couple of hours. I'll make sure that they see it. But, they don't necessarily confirm. Sometimes they will call you before the event to let you know they're coming. Sometimes they just show up. So, just because you don't know for sure that they're coming, you can hope that they come. Definitely plan for them to be there so that you have spokespeople ready, so that you have your visuals to make the event strong. And with print reporters, which Olivia is going to get a little bit more into this again in just a second, print reporters, you may be able to have a slightly longer conversation with them depending who they are, but not necessarily either. So again, you really want your pitch to be strong and fast. And when I contact print reporters, especially, I usually, because you know who you're talking to in that case, I like to start with reporters who have previously covered my stories or with whom I've had, extensive conversations in the past, just because it makes me feel a little bit more relaxed because I don't anticipate that they're going to hang up on me. So it gives me sort of a chance to practice my pitch with a sort of friendlier audience that I can expect to listen and hear me out. So it's just, that's an idea. If you are, once you've gotten covered, it's never a bad idea to kind of start your pitch with someone who's already covered you, so that you kind of have someone who knows who you are and what you do that's going to be willing to hear you out. And so then I was just going to ask Olivia, as a print reporter and online reporter as well, like what kind of lead time do you like on a story?
So it really does depend on the type of story. If it's really just if the idea is to kind of write up an event that's happening that's part of an ongoing story. Perhaps I've covered it before. Perhaps I've done. We've even spoken before. There have been past articles on this. This is an update. And you've sort of provided in your your press release or your media advisory, sort of the majority of the information that I, as a writer or whoever you're speaking to, is going to need. Then oftentimes, if it's kind of a very straightforward piece, then, it's more of even of a heads up that is kind of desired. If there's, you've maybe heard the term, and maybe this is even coming up later, but just to sort of put it out there now, maybe you've heard the term embargo, where folks working with a campaign on the communication side will kind of have their release all written, and before they want the information to actually be available, they'll say this is embargoed until this date. That means don't really tell anyone, don't share this information, don't write a story about it or reprint this press release until the date that we give. But by sending that to the journalist, they now have a sense when this is going to happen, and they also can kind of get their heads around what kind of coverage they're going to do. So really, a couple of days in advance for something like that is ideal. Perhaps even a reminder if you've kind of gone back and forth and have some level of agreement about when. Or some sort of vague general sense of when they are going to run the story, whether that's an online publication or a print publication. And we'll get into kind of follow-up we'll get into that later, definitely. But so really just a few days. If it's a story, again, whether it's an ongoing story or it's sort of you hope for this to be kind of a more in-depth piece that introduces perhaps a wider audience to the ongoing issue, where the journalist is going to have to do some more research. They may have a lot of follow-up questions for you, even in addition to what's already in the press release. That can require more lead time and may not even, sort of depending on what your goals are, which you've decided already in advance, you may not necessarily need for that piece to go up right away, sort of on a specific date. So there may be a little bit even of more kind of play time in terms of the needs of your campaign on your end. But for a piece like that, there's more planning that needs to go into it. There's more time and energy that the writer needs to spend on it. So that's going to need, there's going to need to be more lead time on a piece like that. Whether on the beginning you want to let them know a few weeks in advance because you'd like to perhaps communicate with this journalist about getting, whether it's possible to get the piece out by a specific time, or the lead time may come sort of after the event. Maybe there's a sort of a specific day that's coming up or an event that's coming up that they will, an aspect of which they'll incorporate into a larger piece on the issue. But something that's going to be more in-depth is going to need more lead time. And I do also want to say that, sort of piggyback or sort of piggybacking or veggie-backing, as some would say, on what Jennie was saying about pitching and how it can kind of be challenging. So I just want to say that today's no, or today's, sorry, we can't cover this story right now, could be tomorrow's yes. These are ongoing relationships, ideally, that you're building with individual journalists, with news outlets. Could they may not cover this particular issue, but they will know you better when you contact them about the next event or the next issue that you want them to cover. And furthermore, it could be, sort of, even if it's not tomorrow's yes on directly covering your issue, it could be next week's call when they want to include an aspect of the issue that you're working on in a piece on a broader or another connected issue. And that's how you can sort of be positioned as a local or kind of regional subject matter expert on the issue that you're working on, because they may reach out to you for counsel on another piece. So there's lots of different ways that those relationships can play out. So, if they say no once, that doesn't mean they're not interested at all. It's definitely nothing personal. And, that's sort of a step in cultivating the relationship, planting seeds for future coverage and future engagement. So that's kind of the lead time question. In terms of the elements that sort of make me more likely to cover the story, they're really, that goes back to some of the points that I covered earlier. Is this that talk about what makes a story newsworthy? Is it about people? Is it real, and how is it about people? What is sort of the compelling point or aspect of your message that you are delivering to me as a journalist, and then I am then delivering to the audience that you want to reach. And yeah, just in terms of the relationship between the media advisory and a pitch, I mean, the former really is an invitation for the media outlet, the journalist, to show up. The pitch really reminds them very specifically and very quickly why they ought to care. Basically, it really sort of drives home the reason why this particular person or outlet ought not miss this opportunity to cover this issue. So the pitch really is really an opportunity to say to really bring forth the kernel of importance to that particular journalist or news outlet. And Jennie went into more detail about, kind of the kind of nuts and bolts of pitching, but it's really an opportunity to say, this is why you can't miss this. This is why you care. And this is why your audience cares, which is why you should care. What automatically makes me not interested in a story? This actually goes back to the problem versus solution point that Jennie brought up earlier. You're not just pitching a problem; you're pitching a potential solution. And similarly, make sure that when you're pitching an event or you're pitching an issue, you're pitching a story and not a topic. Like, for instance, what would automatically sort of, especially if it's a time crunch, and there are, sort of many competing, sort of priorities in terms of what to write about and what to cover. If someone calls up and says, you really need to cover HIV criminalization. HIV criminalization is an important national and international issue. That is a topic. That's not a story. So what's the particular kind of local or regional impact of this issue? Who is being impacted specifically? What's happening now? Like, why is this important now? And why is it a story as opposed to a broader topic? I may be interested in the broader topic, but there's not necessarily something for me to sink my, to sort of sink my interest and sink my teeth into as a writer, unless I'm being pitched a specific story with specific interest. I see who's impacted. I see which people are involved. I see why it's different. I see why it's unique and significant at this time right now. So be sure that you're pitching a story and not a topic. That covers that slide, and I believe that there is a poll to some of these points that relates to a lot of the points that we've come up with already that Jennie's going to lead us through. Around who's on the call and on the webinar has ever spoken to media as part of a campaign or advocacy effort or event. So is there kind of a...
Yes, so I'm going to start the poll right now. So I'm going to start the poll right now. So the question is just, have you ever spoken to media as part of your advocacy? Whoops. Sorry. Here we go. Okay, I'm opening it right now. So yeah, just if you're at the computer, if you just want to go ahead and let us know if you have ever spoken to the media as part of your advocacy, because Gina is about to talk about her experience speaking with media. It would be good to see how many of you guys have already done that. Just another minute. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and close out the polling. It looks like a good number of you have spoken to media several times. There's a few people who have never spoken to media, and just a couple who have only spoken to media once or twice. So it looks like we have some veterans here, but we can always improve. I know that I certainly have over the years, and I know Gina has as well, and she's going to share that with us. And I think Olivia is going to lead us into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gina, I mean, we've talked a lot about kind of spokespeople and speaking with media. We've touched on that, and I'm really interested in sort of hearing about your experience preparing for an interview, an event where there's going to be press there. How do you develop talking points? Who do you work with on those? Just really looking forward to. You have so much experience and so much wisdom around this. So, how do you prepare? Where do you get started?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. So the first thing I do is when I'm preparing to speak to the media is I have to know what I'm going to talk about. So I make sure that I do my homework. I know the topic. I know exactly what it is I'm talking about. I'm always prepared. So I don't wake up that morning knowing that I'm going to talk to the media and then start doing my research. I do it in advance. I developed those talking points with the help of, organizations like PWN and other advocacy organizations. Like in Louisiana, we have LAN, Louisiana AIDS Advocacy Network, and whatever our issues may be statewide, we'll discuss those things on calls at different meetings. And when it's time to meet with the media, those are the things that I'll talk about. It's not easy to develop talking points by yourself because you really don't have anybody to play off of. So what I like to do is have a group of people that we're all lending our voice to this issue. So we're all talking about it, and I'm taking notes. I'm writing things down. I make bullet points. And believe it or not, and then I use my daughter and my grandson as the people that I can talk about these issues to who are neutral. So they don't even know the issue, to make sure that I'm covering everything. Because they'll tell you, you left, well, my grandson won't, but my daughter will tell me, you left this out. Why don't you talk about that? So that's one of the ways.
So now I'm curious how you, as this slide speaks to, how do you stay on message? How do you kind of make sure that you're talking, as you said before, that you're talking about what you came there to talk about when journalists may have different ideas about what they want to hear about?
I stick to what I know. I'm not going to try to give you the theory of relativity. I don't know that, so I'm not giving you that. I'm going to give you just what I know. I know that sometimes I only have a couple of seconds to get something really relevant out. I don't know if anybody saw the National HIV/AIDS Strategy last summer when we rolled out the newest one. And I was on a panel, and one of the things I said was, why is HIV a crime? And that was the thing that was tweeted over and over again. That was that sound bite. That was that thing that people were able to grab onto. And it's easy to understand. It made sense, because we were talking about HIV, people living with HIV and stigma. So why is HIV a crime? Also, people will try, the reporters and different people, not you, Olivia, different people will try to get you off your message. They'll ask you a question that has nothing to do with what you came there to talk about. I have tunnel vision. If I'm there to talk about issues for women living with HIV, that's all I'm going to talk about. I'm not talking about what's going on with men living with HIV. I'm not even talking about adolescents at that point. I'm talking about women living with HIV. So I make sure that I stay on message, stay in that tunnel vision frame of mind.
Excellent. So now in terms of, this is great. So now do you have any kind of thoughts or tips about, kind of situations where an interview went well or where it went not so well, and, kind of what the outcome was there, what you kind of learned from an experience that was either like really, really great or perhaps gave you an opportunity to kind of use one of those tools for when the journalist and you are not necessarily on the same page?
Yes. When I first started doing interviews, I didn't know I had the power to ask to see the interview before it went to print. So what I did was I was doing an interview with our local newspaper, and I was misquoted in this article, and everybody thought I really said this, and I kept saying, but I didn't say that. And they were like, yes, it's right here. This is what you said. I said, but I was there. I know I didn't say that. I didn't have a relationship with that reporter that I could call her up and say, we need to change this, or we need to, or you need to, retract that and put in what I really said. So what I did, because I didn't really know how to handle things, in the comment section, because our newspaper is online and in print. So in the comment section, I went in and I said what I really said. You don't always have the ability to do that. Sometimes, the reporter, they have a time, they're on a time crunch, so they have to get this article out quickly. A good experience was when I did my interview with Ebony, and that was one of the things that I negotiated from the beginning, that before it goes to print, I need to see it. And I was sent the interview, and I read it, and I was like, wait a minute, the way that it's written, it doesn't even make sense. You know, it wasn't even telling my story from when I found out my zero status to now. It was like going in the middle, and then it was the beginning. And I was like, no. So I basically rewrote. No, I didn't rewrite it, y'all. I basically rearranged everything that she had so that it flowed like a story, so that it told everything that we wanted it to tell. A lot of times I know that, well, not a lot of times, sometimes reporters will do things for the shock value. We all see that. The headline may be something that really like grab your attention and make you want to click on the story. So I understand those things, but we have to be vigilant about getting our truths out there, you know, and not letting other people tell our story for us. You know, if you gave the interview, you can ask the reporter as soon as you sit down with them, once this is written up, can I see it? You know, even sometimes they'll even let you see it before it goes to their editors. Can I see it to make sure that you captured what I actually said? We're not taking quotes out of context. We're not saying things that could really impact in a negative way our message. You know, we're trying to get a message out there that we want other people to buy into, basically, you know, and become our allies because of our message. So if the wrong thing is getting out there to the public, then it's kind of hard to grab people and get them to come in with you and help further that message.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think that we'll go a little bit more into the kind of the from the reporter side or the editor side around making those kinds of corrections. But thank you so much.
And I just want to say before we end, I'm sorry, Olivia, that staying on message is very, very, very important to stay on message. And always remember, if we don't want them using stigmatizing language, we can't use it. So we have to mirror or show them or be the people who will teach them the correct language we want used when talking about us or to us. You know, it bothers me a lot when I read stories and things are said about us that we know are not true. You know, just by typing into the little box, how many of you have ever heard a story or read a story and they said things like AIDS victims or AIDS, you know, they'll talk about someone who's been arrested for what they call exposure, and they'll call them an AIDS monster. You know, there's different things like that, and we do not want, yes, HIV sufferer, oh my goodness, I could pull my locks out. We don't want the general public to hear those words because we already deal with enough stigma. So it's all about using destigmatizing language to get our point across and to make sure that the reporters understand what that language looks like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for that. And you guys can see the table up here, you know, on the slide with some of the preferred language. And I'm actually thinking I want to try to, for PWN, so actually this was the back of a card that we produced for PWN Philly as part of their Stand Up to Stigma campaign. And I was thinking, you know, this would be a really great tool to be able to actually to have our members, especially members who are going to be media spokespeople, to have these cards and be able to give them to reporters and camera people, you know, when they do interviews, just as a sort of quick way to, you can even just throw it in there with a few words like, there's a lot of stigma around HIV. These are the preferred terms that we use, and we would really appreciate it if you would, use these preferred terms and avoid these other terms when you cover this story. And so if you have something physical to hand to them, it's an easy conversation. And it's also available on the website, but if you're doing an actual, face-to-face interview, I think it would be a nice tool to be able to just hand them that card the same way you could hand them a business card, for example. So that's something that I would like for us to produce pretty soon. And if you're doing a phone interview, for example, or an interview over email, you can also send them a link, and it's down there at the bottom, and it's up on our website. So that's definitely something else you can do to make sure that that the reporter is aware of the language, because a lot of times, especially if it's a local reporter and they don't often cover HIV-related issues, they may have absolutely no idea that this is the language they're supposed to be using, or that they should avoid those terms. So, I think we all have this sort of responsibility as spokespeople or as communicators to make sure that they're aware that they should be using these terms. So thank you so much, Gina. And so a little bit now about maximizing your coverage. So positive or even neutral media coverage can really boost your campaign. It can put pressure on decision makers. If they're not acting on something that's been identified as a big problem that's affecting people in the community, they don't want to be in the news for not dealing with this issue. So it can definitely help put pressure. It also lends legitimacy to your efforts. It shows that this is something that the press sees worthy of coverage, that they think the public should know about. So whether it's, potential allies that you're trying to get involved with your cause, or decision makers, or, even it can give you legitimacy vis-a-vis your opposition, if you have opposition, and the general public as well. So it definitely brings your issue sort of to the forefront. It makes the public aware of your issue, and hopefully if you are, messaging it well, hopefully it will move them to support your issue as well. And it definitely can, just sort of in a more internal sense, it can create a lot of excitement and momentum for your team, which is why I'm going to go into that in just a minute, but it's important to make sure that the folks you're working with on this issue see the media coverage and know about it, and, have the opportunity to share it with the people in their community and their friends and neighbors and family. And then it can also position you as an authority, especially if you're an effective spokesperson like we just discussed and you stay on message. You can actually be in a position where reporters will call you when there's a story, for example, related to HIV. They might call you to get your perspective on that. And so you can sort of put yourself in a position of authority, which is really helpful in getting your message across repeatedly. And so your media coverage is going to have a lot less of a positive impact if your team and your allies don't see and hear about it. So I personally think it's really important to take note of who the reporters or outlets covering the event or story are. If you can, get their card, their business card, or try to get their name, their email, their phone number. For one thing, you want to, as Olivia was talking about earlier, you want to make sure that you're keeping up with those contacts so that you can reach out to them again next time. But it's also a way to stay in contact with them. For example, if something in the story doesn't come out right and you want to try to get a correction on it, or you want to get in touch with them because you can't find the story after the fact, it's good to have their information. And also to be able to tell your team, these are the outlets that covered our story. And then you want to ask when they expect the story to air. It's always helpful if you're going to so you can try to find it later. And then I like to just check their website periodically throughout the hours and days after the event until I find the story. So, just to try to get it as soon as it comes out and share it with my team. And so in looking for the story, if you're having trouble finding it, sometimes the reporter will even send you a link to the story. That's especially true of, print and online journalists. If I've been working with them on a story and help connect them with spokespeople and all that, a lot of times I will ask for them to send me a link as soon as the story's up so I can share it with those folks, and usually they will. But if that doesn't necessarily work as well with TV or radio, but if you're trying to find your coverage, you can Google the keywords that you would expect to come up in a story about your event, like HIV or the location of the event, your name or the name of, whoever was interviewed is another way to try to find the coverage. Or you can plug those into the search feature on that outlet's website. And I would contact the reporter if I don't see the story come out within a couple of days, if we're talking about, a live event. If it was like an interview by phone or something, you might want to allow a little bit more time, but that's another reason why you would want to ask when they expect it to come out, just so you can kind of, keep an eye out for it. So when you do find the coverage of your story or your event, you want to make sure that everybody sees it, at least if it was good. You don't necessarily want to publicize it if it didn't come out well, but if it was good, definitely post it on Facebook. Tag the people or the organizations that were involved in the campaign, even if they are not in the story. Make sure that they see it by tagging them. You can post it on Twitter. Use a hashtag for your campaign if you have one. You can use any trending hashtags that could make sense in the context of the story. For example, Black Lives Matter, that's a popular hashtag that might help some people see your issue who wouldn't otherwise. Hashtag HIV is always good if it's an HIV-related issue. Mention the people or organizations involved by using their Twitter handles. That way they will see your tweets and they'll retweet, and hopefully some of their contacts will retweet as well. And then if it's the coverage is related to a campaign or efforts you're working on with PWN, for example, with the regional chapters, definitely make sure to send it to me because I will definitely promote it through our social media, through our emails. So I can help you with that. So yeah, if it's anything related to HIV in particular, if it's related to an advocacy campaign you're working on at the chapter level, definitely let me know about it and send me links so I can help promote. Also send the stories to your team and your allies by email. Just make sure that they have it. I like to if it's an event, I like to kind of wait and compile all of the coverage into one and send out an email that has links to everything. But you might want to, the first story that comes out, you might want to go ahead and blast that out to everybody just so that they can see that, oh, this paid off, we actually got media coverage, and then later you can follow up with sort of more complete coverage if there's several different stories that you want to share. Start a file, like we mentioned earlier, start a file where you keep the contacts of the reporters who've covered your events or your campaign and with whom you've had conversations about it. So even those who haven't covered it, but, that you think could potentially cover it in the future, keep notes on the contacts, like how you found that person, if you had a conversation with them or not, if they actually covered you, just so that when you're doing future pitches, you kind of have an idea of who these people are and who they might, who might most be interested in covering it. And you could also share that with, if someone else is going to be doing this for your campaign, you could share it with them as well so that they know who to contact. And I like to keep all of my press coverage in one place. So, links to the stories online or the news clips, keep that in one place so that later you have sort of this portfolio of the campaign and you can share it with your allies. You can, share it at an event. But yeah, just keep it all centralized somewhere. And then photo and video that you or your team took at the events and throughout the campaign as well. Definitely keep up with all that. Take your own pictures at events because even if the media doesn't cover you, you can still, make your own media using social media, using your photos. You can make photo albums. You can post videos. So nothing stops you from doing that, and you should plan on doing that regardless of whether or not the media actually shows up. And then also keep track of all the media advisories and press releases that you've sent out through the campaign. Why? Because you might want to actually use some parts over again, because if you're working on a campaign that's around one issue, then a lot of the background and context are probably going to stay the same over time. So, instead of having to reinvent the wheel every single time you sit down at the computer, if you have some of the ones that you've done earlier, you might be able to pull, whole paragraphs, or at least sort of, take paragraphs and maybe change a few things. But you can definitely reuse work that you've done before. Okay, and let's see. So, and so then as far as what happens if, if the interview doesn't come out well or the way that you want it to. And, we did talk a little bit already about the importance of staying on message. Gina mentioned, that she has been able to see her interviews before they've gone to press before, which is really awesome. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. In fact, I would say it usually doesn't. A lot of times a reporter will send you a link once the story is up if you request it, but they don't usually, at least in my experience, they don't usually show you the whole story before it's published. So they might, if you're giving them a quote, they might tell you, this is how I'm going to quote you. Is this okay? So I've definitely had that happen. I've never actually seen a whole story before it went to print before. If it was an individual profile or interview, you probably would have better chances of that. If it's a story about the issue, it's a little bit less likely. But so sometimes, stigmatizing language comes out in the final story. I know I've heard some stories about that. Sometimes there's inaccurate or out of context quotes, and sometimes there's inaccurate or incomplete information. So I kind of wanted to ask both Olivia and Gina, sort of what the best ways of handling this are. And I guess I'll start. I'll start with you, Gina, because I know you said this has happened to you before. So if you just want to kind of explain a little bit about when it's happened and what what you did and what the outcome was, and if you would do anything differently next time.
Yes. So the story, I was quoted. Well, I was called an AIDS victim, and it was during the time when I didn't know that I could see the different things that were coming out. Like you said, Jennie, getting them to send me a link to the story in advance. It was when it hit the paper, everybody saw it at the same time. And I called the reporter to see if they would change the language. And the reporter said, well, this is the language that we've always used. And at the time, I was just finding my voice, and I wasn't as empowered as I am today. Today, what I would do differently is I would write that publication, the newspaper, whoever, a nice little letter saying this is, this stigmatized me. This is not who I am, and I would really appreciate it if you all would change, that language. And if they don't change it, and if it's a newspaper article, there's always op-eds. So I'll go ahead on and write my own little op-ed and submit it to the paper, and hopefully they'll put it in. But once again, I always go back to those comment sections in those articles and make sure that I say what I need to say in the comment section. And I'll identify myself as Gina Brown. I never come in as an anonymous person because I want them to know that I'm not pleased with that article and that language that you used against me.
Great, thank you. And Olivia, coming more from the perspective of the editor or, the reporter, if somebody were to come back to you and say, hey, there's a problem, how would you like it approached, and what do you think you could or would do about it?
Right. See, this is where that distinction I talked about earlier between sort of HIV-specific media and really other kinds of sort of community-based media, whether that's women-specific publications or LGBT community publications, health publications, and then more general interest media is important because, and also the distinction between online media and then print media, because with online media, first of all, it's much easier to make a correction and then put at the bottom of the piece an earlier version of this piece stated X or Y. Actually, it's A or B. So it's much easier to do that than with print media. So I just want to say that, and also just in terms of HIV-specific media, where the number one goal is to inform sort of the HIV community and sort of intersectional communities about issues and concerns of import to the community, and also to kind of highlight the agency of the HIV community and to empower folks within the community. And we want to be speaking in the most complementary, not just in the most accurate voice possible to that community. That is the number one goal of sort of HIV-specific media. That said, you're much more likely to have a journalist who's writing for, say, Positively Aware or something of that nature, sort of a publication that's sort of specific to the HIV community, send quotes or even send a full story before it goes up. I think that, if that's something that you want, it's definitely, it's definitely within your purview, like Gina said, to ask, especially, and to ask for changes if you see, like, really, if you see an egregious error or something, a misquote or something of that nature. That said, asking that of, some journalists may see that as sort of running at cross purposes to their goal, which is to sort of preserve the integrity of the piece that they're writing by making sure that it's objective and not just sort of and is not too much influenced by kind of the voices and the input of those that they've communicated with in order to write the story and build the story. So that's where it becomes very important to, wherever possible, and as much as possible, make sure that the information that you're providing is presented in the language that you want to see used in the piece. That anything that you say, again, going back to Gina's example about preparing to be a spokesperson, and recognizing that everything's on record. You can't help if they, if the journalist lacks integrity and misquotes you, which is really the example that Gina was sharing, which is a really, really challenging situation, and a really, really challenging, kind of scenario to rectify, or if really, they are taking something that you said and then you realize, well, that's not, did I say that? And it turns out that it actually is something that you said. That's why it's really important to prepare in advance and make sure that what you say and the information that you provide is what you would want to appear in a publication, because everything is on the record. So it just, goes back to that preparation piece. I think it's also really important to think through the purpose and the desired outcome of the changes that you're asking for, especially when it's with a publication or a journalist that you're just building a relationship with now. If there's stigmatizing language used in that story, often, as Gina referred to, sometimes that goes back to their style guide. Sort of publications have like a list of different kinds of language they use to describe different things. They haven't updated it in a while, and they need to. So is this a matter of it being a teaching moment for that publication going forward? And that's the outcome that you can kind of push for. Next time, do this. You need to update your style guide, and this is why. Or is there a case to be made for it really needing to be changed, or for there to be a sort of a retraction to be made? So that's something that you and those you're working with on a campaign can talk about in terms of what the desired outcome is that you want. Is it immediate change to this story, or is it sort of more of a policy change on behalf of the publication for them to commit to doing better later? And also thinking about whether when you read the story, is it a case of inaccurate information, or is it a case of them perhaps writing the story in a different way from the way that you might have presented it, or perhaps not including information that you would have wanted to see in there that they may recognize that for their audience may not be as relevant as other pieces that they've chosen to have in there. So really, having, not just sort of thinking through it yourself, but really having a conversation with trusted folks you're working with on your campaigns to say, what is happening here? Do we want this to, do you really want to, is this an important sort of struggle to push for this change to this specific story, or can we educate the editor for next time, or can we, is this something that we need to address in terms of the way that we present the information in the press release or in our talking points or something of that nature? And really it comes down to, and this is really challenging, it's easier, I think, as you build relationships with individual journalists and publications, and I think that Jennie really touched on this earlier, because when she talked about sort of pitching the folks first, because there's that measure of trust. When you talk to a publication, you are saying, we are collaborating on getting the story out there. Some of it's going to come from me, the information that I'm sharing, the quotes that I'm sharing, and some of it is going to be how you produce it and present it and sort of funnel it based on what the needs of your readership. And hopefully, unless there's an indicator that this is, there's a terrible error and they're really clueless, there's a sort of need to assume best intentions when they, make a mistake based on their kind of lack of knowledge. And, the fact that this is, it is sort of a little bit of a letting go of control, which is really, really hard, especially when we're talking about issues that are close to our lives, that we're passionate about. where we're saying, I'm giving you this information, use it wisely. And oftentimes journalists and publications do. When they don't, how do you go about calling them out on it? Whether it's sort of internally or more externally to ask for a change. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you so much for that. And I think, you really covered that really comprehensively, because I think a lot of times when coverage comes out the way, like in a way that we wouldn't want it to, there's sort of, it requires some internal reflection. For example, like you mentioned with the quotes, sometimes the quotes are completely inaccurate, but I would say more often than that, it just happens that they quoted something out of the interview that we would not have actually wanted to come out, which is why it's, again, going back to the preparation, it's just so important to really prepare, to have your talking points, just a couple of main points that you want to hit on and hammer them home. Use some examples, but just keep coming back to those points, because if they manage to get you off topic, and you say something, whatever you say can definitely come out in the story. And you can't really call and say, oh, I don't like that quote. That's really not the way it works. So, if the quote was truly wrong, you might be able to try to get it fixed. But if you just happen to not like the quote that they chose to use, it probably means that you were not giving them good sound bites. And then again, that's the importance of sound bites. So having just one or two really catchy phrases that really sum up the point you're trying to make. I think I said 9 seconds or less on that slide, but I think that's like 9 words. It should really be even faster than that. Something that just instantly when they hear it, they can quote it. And that way, you're sure to get your point across, because if they hear something that's ready to quote, that's most likely the quote that's going to come out. And it also kind of helps prevent getting those quotes that don't really make the point you were trying to make. So, if you talk for 10 minutes on a single question they ask you, then sort of all bets are off. So if you can kind of stick to your talking points and a couple of sound bites, then you definitely have a better chance of not needing to make those corrections at all. So that should always be the goal, of course, is to not need to correct anything. And like Olivia said, if there's if the problem is stigmatizing language, you have a better shot of just kind of educating them on that and hoping that in the future they'll use what you taught them. And so, I put this up here again, letting them know ahead of time that these are preferred terms, but really importantly, making sure that these are the terms that you are using in your media advisory, in your pitch, in your interviews, anytime that you're interacting with the media, because if that's the way you frame it, there's definitely a much better chance that they will use that same language in the story. So being familiar with it and knowing, when to use it and being able to guide them to that language can really help you out. And so I want to, first I want to put a quick plug for those of you who are going to be at the summit. I see there was some discussion about that in the chat box, which is awesome. So those of you who are going to be at the summit, we're actually going to have a workshop that's really specifically around messaging and being a spokesperson, and it's going to have some hands-on practice, role plays, pretending that you're being interviewed and the reporter is trying to get you off subject. So I know that a lot of people have sort of expressed concern over that scenario, or they've had situations where that's happened. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in improving their spokesperson abilities to take that workshop at the summit. And we'll get a little bit more into this and get some real practice. But I do want to take, we're already a little bit over time, but I can definitely stick around. I believe our other presenters can. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if anyone has any questions that you would like to ask, I'm going to go ahead and put it in Q&A mode, so you can either unmute yourself by pressing *6 to talk, or you could also put them in the chat box and feel free to ask questions of me or Olivia or Gina, and I am going to put us in Q&A mode now.
All attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
So if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to unmute yourself or put them in the chat box. And I did put our emails up here in case you have any questions that you want to kind of follow up with any of the three of us later. And like Olivia said in the chat box, definitely feel free to email us later if a question comes up or you're not comfortable sharing it in this forum. Any questions, any comments? So Kim is asking if they'll be able to get a copy of the slides from the presentation. Yes. I'm going to, so this presentation has been recorded, and within a couple of days I will have both the recording and the slide deck available on our website. And I'm going to actually put in the chat box right now the URL that you can find. You'll be able to find all of that on, so it's, I just entered it, but I'm not seeing it pop up in the chat box, which is weird. Oh, great. I was disconnected. Oh, my internet went out. Well, I'm assuming people can still hear me at least. Well, I see if I can resolve my internet issues. Okay, it's a good thing I'm on the phone too then. So yeah, anyway, you can find on the website within a couple of days, you will find both the recording and the slide deck, and you can get to it. Our website is www.pwn-USA.org. And when you get there at the top of the screen, there's a navigation bar. If you go to resources, you'll see webinars and trainings. And there you can find past webinars and trainings, and you'll find this, and there'll be a link to download the slides. And I will also try to send them out to our communications list and I guess our co-chair list and policy list as well if you are part of those lists. And if you're not and you want to be part of them, just email me, and I will make sure that you are added to those lists so that you will know about all of these trainings and opportunities in the future. And I don't have any, this is strange, so now my any meeting is acting up. So I guess Olivia or Gina, do you see any questions in the chat box? Because I can't seem to get back on the webinar right now.
No, that's okay. Yeah, sorry that your internet's acting up. It doesn't look like there are any questions except for the slide question. Yeah, it looks like folks are just saying wonderful things. Thank you so much for inspiration. Thank you so much, Angel. Thanks everyone for being here. Yeah, I don't see any sort of content-related questions.
Okay, cool. Well, then I will let everyone get back to their daily activities. And I really appreciate everyone for being on here. A big, big thank you to Gina and Olivia for taking time out of their very busy schedules to be here and to share these great tips with us. And definitely feel free to reach out to any of the three of us with any other questions you may have, and feel free to reach out to me in particular if you want PWN help in sort of publicizing your media, or if you need help with a media advisory or press release. That's what I'm here for. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with me if that's a situation where you need it. And I hope to see some of you in our workshop at the summit. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thanks again to our presenters and to everyone for being here.
Thank you so much, Jennie, for having us. Thank you for bringing us together always for these brilliant webinars, and thanks for having me come and speak. It was really a pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.